This is part 1 in my Shaping Character series. The focus here is on the cast as a whole, including main and secondary characters, as opposed to just the main characters, which we'll go over in a later video in the series. First, you need to understand the character's functions, and there are 4 types of characters. First, main characters. This can be a person, a duo, or an ensemble cast. Think Game of Thrones or Stranger Things. Secondary characters, remove them and the story changes. Support characters or functional characters, which complement the story and serve a specific function, but don't have a full arc of their own. And finally, what I like to call atmosphere characters. These are background characters that make the world and scenes feel real. Think the local bartender, or for a more specific example, the cabbage man in Avatar: The Last Airbender. But for the sake of the video, these don't count in the cast of characters, so we'll be focusing on the main 3. Here's the gold standard. You want to create characters that are so compelling that they make any scene watchable. Ideally, you want to make scenes interesting just because certain characters are interacting with each other. Game of Thrones is filled with these examples, especially Tywin Lannister when he's talking with Cersei or Arya or really anybody in that cast. Think the conversations between Littlefinger and Varys, the clashes between Cersei and Tyrion, the unexpected pairing of Arya and the Hound, or if the next book ever comes out of the vault it's sealed in, the long-awaited interaction between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. But note that this is usually done between main and secondary characters and not support characters. If your cast is interesting enough with compelling and contrasting personalities, then audiences can wait for whole seasons or books to come out just to see 2 characters finally interact. This is where contrast design comes in. The goal is to make them each memorable and distinctive enough so that their personalities bounce off of each other, creating conflict. This can be done through morality, such as duty versus freedom, methods, a strategist versus an improviser, temperament, hot versus cold, social style, blunt versus diplomatic, or risk tolerance, reckless versus cautious. This contrast is what creates chemistry. And a tip, contrast works best when both sides are competent. Otherwise, it just becomes the smart characters carrying the dumb characters. This can be especially useful if you have 2 main protagonists, whether they're partners in crime, rivals, or romantic interests. You want to create high contrast between the leads, but we'll go over that in a later video. For example, in Lord of the Rings, Legolas versus Gimli in culture and style, which leads to evolving respect over time, or in Avatar: The Last Airbender between Katara and Toph. Katara is controlling and disciplined, while Toph uses force and instinct. Whenever I write, and especially for my upcoming book, I try to create a small cast of characters that all contrast each other and complement each other in unexpected ways, like a righteous reaper clashing with the personification of evil, or a stubborn fate weaver having to work with the physical embodiment of chaos. When characters are well designed, dialogue becomes cause and effect. To reliably create these types of scenarios, you need 3 layers. First, start with strong character design. Think contrast and goals. Build characters with defined personality traits, values, and objectives. They shouldn't just have personalities, they should have direction and pressure. Second, know them well enough that you could predict their reactions. This means you want to understand each principal character at a fundamental level so that their reactions aren't random. What they want, what they fear, and what they'll never tolerate. Then, when something happens in a scene, you immediately think, what would this character do in this situation? And finally, give each scene a clear goal. A scene isn't people talking. It's someone trying to get something. Information, an emotional need like reassurance, dominance, understanding, or a decision. Good dialogue is like a chain reaction. A says something to push their goal. B answers in a way that only B would based on their goals and values. And that reply creates a new problem or opening, which forces A to adapt and triggers their next logical move, and so forth. As a writer, the replies should feel predictable. Not because they're boring, but because they're inevitable. And the audience should feel the internal logic in a satisfying way. Like, of course character B would say that. Now, in these scenes, to maintain suspense and keep the audience on their toes, you can use informational asymmetry. Different characters know different things, so each reply is based on incomplete information. And that creates tensions and misreads, suspicion or doubt. When knowledge and trust are uneven, characters begin to test each other, withholding information, forming favorites, and second-guessing each other. You can also use hidden agendas that either the reader or other characters don't know about. Another way is to have the same objective, but different methods. Even when characters align on goals, their approaches can clash. This can create friction, reversals, or reluctant cooperation. And finally, evolving dynamics. As plot events and growth changes people, the logic stays consistent, but relationships change. So the audience today can't rely on yesterday's alliances. Now here are 6 practical tools for designing a cast that creates natural conflict, chemistry, and cause and effect dialogue. Number 1. Give each character a narrative job. These types of characters should do at least one of the following: push the plot forward, create problems, present opportunities and resources, trigger twists, or introduce new information or misinformation. Pressure the protagonist's inner arc. This is when a secondary character creates situations that actively push the protagonist towards or away from their transformation. This could be challenging beliefs or values, pushing moral boundaries, tempting them, such as offering them the easy path that reinforces the protagonist's flaws, create tests and obstacles, blocking the protagonist until they grow, demand a choice, make the protagonist pick between their values, love versus duty, safety versus truth, create consequences as serving as a cost, someone who pays for the hero's flaws, making the cost of saying the same undeniable, or serving as a truth teller, saying what nobody wants to hear. The key here is that whatever they learn has to come into play. Third, they can reveal who the protagonist already is. Their job is to make the protagonist's traits, values, and contradictions visible to the reader without necessarily changing them. They function like a lens. Through contrast, similarities, and interactions, we understand the protagonist's personality and priorities clearer. There are two ways to do this. First, you can create a situation. These characters expose weaknesses and strengths. Design situations where characters intentionally or unintentionally reveal vulnerability and challenge strengths. Or they can reveal the protagonist through the characters themselves. These can be done through mirrors, foils, and shadows so that every main character is reflected in the others. A mirror is a character who shares the same background or core want as a protagonist, but makes different choices, highlighting who each could have been. Foils accentuate differences. This is a character whose contrasting traits or beliefs sharpen another character's personality or values. And shadows are characters that represent who the protagonist could become if they fail to change or give in to their worst impulses. This is especially useful for rivals or love interests. Foils are most often seen in antagonists. Note, pressuring the protagonist's inner arc pushes the protagonist to become someone else, so a change. And revealing the protagonist helps the reader see who the protagonist is right now. Clarity. And finally, they can represent a theme or the world itself. This can be by embodying a thematic argument, justice versus mercy, individual freedom versus collective security, truth versus comfort, or revealing theme by showcasing the world or the story's stake. For example, they can represent a social group or institution, or show consequences in the wider world. Take into account that characters react to situations differently, and these sort of situations can expose strengths and weaknesses. In The Lord of the Rings, Galadriel doesn't just exist. She tempts, warns, and reframes the theme of power. In Game of Thrones, secondary players constantly introduce new stakes, information, and ethical pressure. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, Iroh functions as Zuko's conscience and moral compass. On the other hand, you can see Stranger Things Season 4, where the cast grew too big for its own good and several characters had little or weak function to support the story, such as Mike or Jonathan. Every character you add is a promise to the audience. They will matter. To the plot, to the protagonist's arc, to the theme, or at least to the moment-to-moment tension. So to prevent ensemble blur and keep spotlight control, be careful to keep the cast lean enough so that each character gets meaningful screen time and a clear job. If they're present in a scene, you don't want them to feel like dead weight. Combine or retool characters who overlap. If two characters do the same job, either merge them, make their roles more distinct, or change their function. For example, two characters can be the mean competitors, but one can embody ruthless ambition while the other embodies moral compromise. Make the time the audience has invested in these characters have a payoff, through plot, character, or thematic impact. A good rule of thumb, if a character isn't changing scenes, they're optional. If they could be removed or replaced without altering the story's direction, then they don't have a strong function yet. Number 2, anchor each character to a core want. These aren't just goals, but emotional wants. A core goal would be what the character is trying to do, win a competition, survive the academy. But a core want is what they're trying to resolve, whether they know it or not. To escape a destiny, to be forgiven, to be loved, to be respected, or to prove they're not weak. When your cast has distinct emotional wants, their reactions diverge naturally, even when they share the same objective. Emotional wants are tied to hidden fears. A want is a deep emotional hunger. A fear is a private reason they think they can't have it. The mask is the behavior they use to hide the fear. And the liar belief is a flawed conclusion they've built their life around. I want to escape destiny, because if destiny's not real, then I'm not in control. I want to be forgiven, because if not, I'll have to admit I'm the villain. I want to be respected, because I'm terrified I'm indisposable. I want to be loved, because I'm terrified that when people know the real me, they'll leave. A quick way to figure this out is to write 4 lines for each significant character. The outer goal, or the plot. What do they want to accomplish right now? The inner want, the emotional. What do they want to be true about themselves? The hidden fear. What are they terrified the story will prove? And the method. How do they chase the goal? Through force, charm, rules, manipulation, or sacrifice. Different methods create friction even with shared goals. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, Zuko's goal is to capture the Avatar. His emotional want is to restore his honor and be worthy of his father's love. He fears being unlovable and that he'll always be rejected. and he goes about pursuing his goal by chasing after the Avatar and trying to prove himself through force, always taking reckless risks to earn his father's approval. Then you can engineer conflict by giving characters compatible goals but incompatible wants, the same want but opposing methods, or opposing wants that can't coexist. 3. Complementary or contradicting agendas, beliefs, and arcs. You can make their beliefs clash. Conflict is strongest when characters believe opposing truths. For example, death is mercy versus death is punishment, power corrupts versus power reveals who you truly are. Even allies should disagree on something important. You can also make their goals clash or align in unexpected ways. Goals can clash even when characters are on the same side. To create conflict, give characters conflicting or incompatible agendas. Both goals are possible and the characters have to work around it. Or incompatible, where one character's goals actively blocks the others. Their goals cannot coexist. One character has to fail. Second, through hidden goals they won't admit. Or third, the same objective but different methods, so they're forced into friction, reversals, and reluctant cooperation. If you also layer in informational asymmetry, so different characters know different information, their choices will naturally create misreads, suspicions, and shifting alliances. You can also make their goals align in unexpected ways, such as between a protagonist and antagonist. While they share the same goal, their methods and fundamental beliefs are different. If characters share the same goals, make the motivations behind the goals contrasting or unique. Maybe one character is motivated by greed, but the other character is trying to solve the conflict out of love. And finally, character arcs. This is for protagonists and main secondary characters. Each character is affected by the theme in different ways, which leads to different reactions. Great ensemble storytelling often pairs arcs. One character's rise mirrors another's fall. One learns to trust while another learns independence. One heals while another refuses to. Give your cast arcs that echo or counterpoint each other so that the ensemble cast feels like it's moving in a coordinated thematic pattern, rather than each character growing or falling in isolation. Note that while protagonists will have a full arc, secondary characters have shorter arcs since they have less page or screen time and fewer growth moments. But these arcs usually impact the plot in significant ways. So for secondary characters, use one decisive pivot, a choice that permanently alters relationships or stakes. In Lord of the Rings, Boromir's arc is short, but his choice lands like a hammer because it pivots the emotional story. Number 4. Dynamics and microdynamics. Secondary characters should have different relationships and dynamics, not only with the main leads, but also amongst each other. Characters have favorites, different levels of closeness, know different things, and often have shared history. A couple of tips for this. Don't write a friend group, write a web. A trusts B resents C envies A, and D feels like it's left out. Add informational asymmetry, like we mentioned in the golden standard. These are secrets, partial truths, and misinterpretations that stem from characters knowing different things. In a group setting, this can lead to suspicion and doubt within the group, creating conflict. Take into account shared history. If certain characters have shared history, decide how this has helped shape relationships, dynamics, and individual personalities. For example, in the cases of foils and shadows, where characters with the same background chose differently, or by sharing goals but differentiating in motivations. And remember to escalate and evolve relationships. Shifting dynamics and informational asymmetry can lead to interesting relationships, like misunderstandings that cause jealousy and friends turning against each other, or even making mortal enemies into allies. When characters share the same goal but differ in methods or beliefs, confrontation or unexpected coordination can change the dynamics. Make characters who share the same objective clash in methods, or characters who have different objectives complement in methods. Dynamics should evolve due to plot and growth. A good example of this is the enemies to lovers trope. Number 5, make them memorable. You want to control first impressions. Audiences decide fast whether or not they'll pay attention to a character, so have strong introductions. When a character first appears on page, quickly reveal who they are through one distinct action or a first line of dialogue that reveals personality, beliefs, or values. They should do or say something that immediately tells the reader something about who they are. Avoid long descriptions when you're mentioning a character for the first time, unless it's crucial to the scene at hand. Love interest or main antagonist can be exceptions. And avoid neutral introductions, like characters who just show up. A second way to do this is to associate them with something memorable. This could be an object, a symbol, a memorable contradiction, like someone who's giant and rough, but likes to paint flowers. A visual design and odd habit that shapes character, a unique reaction like laughing in the face of bad news, or firing back with a joke when someone insults them. A distinctive voice, so dialogue that only this person would say, or a recurring lens, like duty or honor. Note that memorability is not the same thing as likability. You could even write characters who, on paper, should be unlikable, but still become likable or compelling to watch. Give them a redeeming counterweight, charisma, competence, humor, vulnerability, or a personal code. Or make them the kind of person who instantly raises the tension or energy of every scene they enter. The goal isn't to make the audience approve of them, it's to get them engaged. Either we end up liking them or we hate them. We don't want them to leave the scene. And finally, you can make them visually distinctive. Maybe they have bright red hair or a thin, pale face. For secondary or support characters, to avoid the reader forgetting who they are or what they look like, try to describe them with the same wording so that the reader associates that with the character. If you want the reader to make a quick association, don't try to fill the descriptions up with synonyms or overly flowery language. But keep in mind that this is different for main characters. And finally, number 6. Complementary skill sets and matching weaknesses. The strongest ensembles are built like a toolkit. Each character contributes a specific capability, but also carries a distinct liability. So a cost, a blind spot, a taboo, or a trauma trigger. Ideally, where one character is strong, you want another to be weak. Great team scenes come from trade-offs. Some examples I've used in my upcoming book are, we need his ability to resolve tension, but he freezes under pressure. We need her abilities, but she's aggressive and has no self-control. We need his knowledge, but he's entirely unpredictable. We can also see this in Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship of the Ring. The Fellowship's diversity of skills is what makes a quest plausible, and the moral weaknesses create drama. So, in summary, here are the 6 tools for creating a cast of compelling characters. My name's Agustina Uriel Greco, and I'll be uploading more videos soon.